On this episode of Reading the Royals, we're going to explore the striking similarities as well as the key differences between two women born nearly a century apart. Both were American divorcees, both were avid readers of Vogue and had very similar and very expensive fashion sensibilities. Both were brought into the very heart of the royal family only to have tumultuous relationships with their in-laws, and both were the subject of a global media frenzy, facing fierce criticism for their perceived attitude and ambition. If you haven't guessed it by now, I'm referring to Wallis Simpson and Meghan Markle. Born in Pennsylvania in 1896, Wallis met Edward Windsor at a party hosted by a mutual friend. Wallis was 34 at the time. Born in Los Angeles in 1981, Meghan met Harry Wales on a blind date set up by a mutual friend. Meghan was 34 at the time. But it's not just me who has recognised the eerie similarities between these two American-born women. According to royal author Ingrid Seward, Prince Philip himself referred to Meghan as DOW, short for Duchess of Windsor, the title Wallis held after King Edward VIII abdicated after less than a year on the throne to marry her. Seward wrote, "While the Queen continued to champion Harry's new love, Philip warned his wife to be cautious. It was uncanny, he told her, how much Meghan reminded him of the Duchess of Windsor." He wasn't simply referring to the fact that both were pencil-slim, dark-haired and glamorous American divorcees. In my opinion, Philip, having met Wallis on a number of occasions before her death in April 1986, sensed that Meghan could be similarly disruptive to the royal family as the actual Duchess of Windsor was, and maybe he was right. Today we will untangle the story of Wallis Simpson and Meghan Markle, two duchesses who have changed the trajectory of the royal family forever. We must start this story by looking at the royal men involved, Prince Edward and Prince Harry. Edward was born in 1894 as the eldest child of George, then Duke of York, and Mary of Teck. Upon the accession of his father, King George V, Prince Edward became the heir to the throne, and a popular one at that. Here we can see the picture of Edward the public were used to, a young and handsome military man. I mean, look at that stance. In 1914, Edward was commissioned in the Army's Grenadier Guards after the outbreak of World War I and served as a staff officer. After the war, he made extensive goodwill tours of the British Empire and became very popular with the British people, particularly the ladies. He was a popular prince touring Britain and the Empire, fond of golf, tennis, parties and dancing. Indeed, Edward's own diary extracts include details of a rather rock and roll lifestyle. "My dancing is improving," he wrote. "I got in at 4. I've not had more than 8 hours sleep in the last 72 hours, he wrote in another entry. Edward was handsome and became known for his bachelor status. It was reported that Edward was linked at one time or another with the names of most of the world's eligible princesses. Here we have a drawing based on a radio description of Edward's visit to America in September 1924. Edward is the focus of the room and very much the focus of the woman he is dancing with. Look at her smile. In his obituary, the New York Times described Edward as a Prince Charming who did not excel academically and proved more interested in his banjo than his books. Sound familiar? 12 years after the death of Edward, Prince Harry was born in 1984 as the second child of Prince Charles and Princess Diana. After experiencing the tragic death of his mother when he was just 12, Harry turned to alcohol, drugs and partying, instead of focusing on his education. It always seemed he wanted to be anywhere but his desk. I think this picture in particular speaks 1,000 words. Taken in his dorm room in 2003, Harry looks forlorn. At Eton, students are allowed to decorate their own rooms, and he has chosen a black and white picture of his mother, who died years prior to this picture being taken. This is a young man attempting to get through school and navigate his teenage years without the guidance of his mother. You may also notice the beaded bracelet on his wrist. It is believed that Harry bought this in Africa, where he and William were whisked off shortly after Diana's death. For Harry, Africa represents a place he feels he can be himself, a place where he has said he can feel completely relaxed and normal. Wearing the bracelet during his school years indicates his desire to be anywhere but in the classroom. Like his great-granduncle Edward, Harry is open about the fact he did not enjoy school. During a 2015 visit to the Ottery Youth Centre in Cape Town that looks after teens with behavioural difficulties, Harry admitted, "I didn't enjoy school at all. I would have liked to have come to a place like this. When I was at school, I wanted to be the bad boy." In his own biography, Spare, Harry admits to smoking in the bathrooms at Eton. He writes, "I knew it was bad behaviour. I knew it was wrong. My mates knew too. We talked about it often, while stoned, how stupid we were to be wasting an Eton education." Harry was mocked for his poor academic record and, according to royal reporter Katie Nicholl, was far more interested in having fun than knuckling down. He left Eton in 2003 with 2 A-levels, a B in art and D in geography. But his tendency to party continued long after he left the hallowed halls of Eton. Soon dubbed the Party Prince and HRH loose cannon by the tabloids, Harry found himself swept up in a number of scandals during his 20s, from wearing a Nazi costume at a friend's fancy dress party to wearing nothing at all during a game of strip poker in Las Vegas. Good looking in his youth, Harry became known for his bachelor status and had a string of flings and relationships, including with British singer Molly King and the model Cressida Bonus. But despite all of this, Prince Harry saw success with the public. The Prince would often rank highly in popularity polls, with respondents describing him as admirable, likeable, humorous, fun-loving and genuine. Harry's stubbornly high popularity showed the public seemed to be understanding, with each misstep somehow making him seem more normal in a family defined by its regality. Following in the footsteps of his great-granduncle Edward, 20-year-old Harry trained as an officer cadet at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, and in 2006 he joined the Blues and Royals, the second most senior regiment in the British Army. Here we can see Harry on his camp bed during his first tour of Afghanistan in 2008. He looks like a different person to the one we saw feeling sorry for himself at Eton. Now he is a self-assured man with the world at his feet. Harry would stay in the army for 10 years and serve 2 tours in Afghanistan. He would also go on to receive the rank of captain. He would later describe his service as the happiest time in my life, and you can certainly see that in this photo. Much like Edward, a wayward Prince Harry found himself in the army after failing to find himself at school. Enter, stage left, Wallis Simpson and Meghan Markle. Let's start with Bessie Wallace Warfield, who was born in Pennsylvania in 1896, but her father died, leaving her mother dependent on handouts. A fear of destitution followed Wallis for life, and she made it her mission to marry well, and marry well she did. Here we see Wallis soon after the marriage to her first husband, the pilot Earl Winfield Spencer, looking effortlessly glamorous. It is clear that Wallis had managed to get away from her working class roots. Despite her happy demeanour, things were not so happy at home. Spencer was alleged to be abusive and an alcoholic. He would regularly hit Wallis and tie her up for talking to other men. After several separations, they divorced in 1927. At the time, this was a brave move for Wallis, as young female divorcees were often deemed social outcasts. But due to her sharp wit and conversational skills, Wallis continued to receive invitations to parties and continued to make her way up the social ladder. In 1928, Wallis married her second husband, Ernest Simpson, whose family part-owned a shipping company. Ernest was half British, and Wallis did not need encouragement to launch herself into English society. When she wasn't attending society events, she enjoyed nipping over to Paris to pick dresses from the designer collections. One of her favourite designers was Givenchy. Remember this for later. In 1929, the Wall Street crash rocked Ernest's income, and Wallis, who was all too used to a luxurious lifestyle, started looking elsewhere. Wallis met Edward during a weekend party in January 1931 at the home of Lady Furness, a married American woman who was said to be the prince's mistress. Just in case you thought Harry had an original idea when he published his memoir Spare, I want to point out that his great-granduncle Edward wrote an autobiography called A King's Story 72 years prior in 1951. In it, Edward revealed he had not made a great first impression on Wallis at Lady Furness's party. The prince tried to make small talk by asking Wallis about central heating in America, to which she issued the stinging reply, "I'm sorry, sir, but you have disappointed me. Every American woman who comes to your country has always asked the same question. I had hoped for something more original from the Prince of Wales." Ouch! Harry didn't have much more luck when it came to meeting Meghan for the first time. Here we have Meghan right around the time she met Harry in 2016. Unlike most of his previous girlfriends, Meghan was genuinely a self-made woman who had climbed the greasy and notoriously competitive pole to Hollywood success. She was now an established actress thanks to her role in the legal drama Suits, and she had been married before to film producer Trevor Engelson in 2011, but that couple separated just 2 years after they exchanged vows. Harry and Meghan's lives collided when they met on a date at Soho House in London in July 2016, but due to bad traffic, the prince arrived late. Recalling their first date in the Netflix documentary Harry and Meghan, the Duke said, "I was panicking, I was freaking out, I was like sweating." Harry said, "When I walked in, I was a hot, sweaty, red ball of mess." Despite rather terrible first impressions, both Prince Harry and Prince Edward embarked on relationships with their respective American women. But this is where their stories begin to diverge. Wallis and Edward were forced to keep their relationship under wraps for years, as she was still married to Ernest. Due to governmental persuasions and pressures, nothing was ever published by the British press during their affair. Meghan and Harry, on the other hand, didn't know the meaning of taking it slow. I mean, the couple's third date was in Botswana, in southern Africa. And soon after that, Harry introduced Meghan to his cousin Princess Eugenie and her then boyfriend, now husband, Jack Brooksbank at Nottingham Cottage. Although Meghan was a divorcee, she was welcomed into the fold far more readily than Wallis was. You must remember at this point the royal family had seen divorces left, right and centre, with Charles and Diana, as well as Andrew and Fergie, for example. Showcasing the royal family's changing attitudes towards divorce, Queen Elizabeth gave her official blessing for Harry and Meghan to be wed in March 2018. The pair were dating for just over a year before they appeared in the sunken garden at Kensington Palace to announce their engagement. On the other hand, Wallis was not made to feel welcome in the firm, and Edward had almost no support after he made it clear that he had every intention of marrying her. Writing about these parallels in her Substack, royal author and journalist Sally Bedell-Smith said, "Harry had no problems marrying a divorcee, especially since both Charles and Camilla were previously married, and the royal family saw Meghan's biracial heritage as an advantage. The couple seemed set for a promising future, representing the crown around the globe with the blessing of the Queen." But in 1936, when he became King Edward VIII on the death of his father George V, neither the government nor the Church of England would permit his marriage to a divorced woman with 2 husbands living, in the words of his mother, Queen Mary. Queen Mary was staunch in her belief that Edward should not marry Wallis, so much so that she and Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin told him that it was his duty to end his relationship with Wallis for the sake of his country. Even his brother Bertie and his wife Elizabeth, who would go on to become the Queen Mother, reportedly stopped visiting Edward, so much did they dislike what they heard of the King's subservient behaviour towards Mrs. Simpson, according to the History Press. Indeed, on different occasions, Edward was seen kneeling down to fasten Wallis's shoes, fetching her nail file and running around after her. Interestingly, Meghan has also been accused of controlling Harry and domineering their relationship. At the Oxford Literary Festival, Sally Bedell-Smith said there were similarities between the Windsors in the 1930s and the Sussexes today. In some respects, Meghan and the Duchess of Windsor have similar qualities: very narcissistic, very controlling, very dominating. And if you read Edward's letters to his previous lover, you can see how weak he was and how much he needed a domineering woman. And it feels as if Harry is somewhat the same way. In 1936, Edward became the first British monarch to ever voluntarily relinquish the crown. His reign had lasted just 326 days. Edward announced his decision to the public on December the 11th during a radio broadcast.
"I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do, without the help and support of the woman I love.
On his abdication, after chaotically reigning for less than a year, Edward and Wallis became the Duke and Duchess of Windsor, cut off from the indignant and wounded royal family and exiled from Great Britain. Here we have a picture from the wedding of Edward and Wallis in the Castle of Condé in France on June the 3rd, 1937. And look how empty it is. Not a single member of the British royal family was present. The register was signed and the civil ceremony, witnessed by but 7 souls, was over in 5 minutes, a Times reporter said at the time. Although an outdated belief now, Wallis is wearing a blue dress rather than a white one, as she was no longer considered pure as a twice divorcee. The blue was dubbed Wallis blue, as it was made specially to match her eyes. Harry and Meghan's wedding day on May the 19th, 2018 could not have been more different. For one, despite being divorced, Meghan wore a white dress by British designer Claire Waite-Keller for Givenchy, the same French fashion house that was favoured by Wallis so many years before. On top of this, more than 29 million people around the world tuned in to watch Harry and Meghan's wedding, as celebrity guests including talk show host Oprah Winfrey, tennis star Serena Williams and Hollywood actor George Clooney filed into St George's Chapel. Later in the evening there was a lavish reception which included a serenade from Sir Elton John. Slightly different from Wallis and Edward's intimate nuptials in a French chateau, but my colleague Robert Hardman pointed out an uncomfortable detail shared between the two weddings on the podcast Queens, Kings and Dastardly Things. Both brides only had one family member in attendance. In Wallis's case, only her Aunt Bessie was present, and Meghan just had her mother, Doria Ragland. Isn't it strange that both Americans had barely any family members present on the biggest day of their lives? I'm not sure what that says about them, but isn't it a bit of a red flag? Though their weddings could not have been more different, Wallis and Meghan were treated similarly by the media in the aftermath. Wallis was named Time's Woman of the Year in 1936, making her the first woman to receive this title. But this was not necessarily an honour. It more reflected just how much Wallis had been talked about in the newspapers. The article from Time described the American socialite who plunged Britain into a constitutional crisis as the most talked about, written about, headlined and interest-compelling person in the world. Notice how there is no compliment in there. The magazine presented her as a 24-carat gold digger whose life before Edward, and I quote, was inconsequential to a degree. 82 years later, Time magazine named Meghan as runner-up as Person of the Year in 2018 for a similar reason. Springing into action is not the easy choice for a young Duke and Duchess who have been blessed through birth and talent and burned by fame, the profile read. Both Wallis and Meghan have spoken out about how they were treated by the British media, and in a weird coincidence, they both use the same word, destroyed. In a conversation excerpt in Town & Country magazine, Wallis told her longtime friend and rumoured lover Herman Rogers that her newfound celebrity made her want to run away and hide. Whether you like it or not, the world is discovering you, Rogers said. Discovering me? Wallis replied. You mean destroying me? In a similar vein, Meghan opened up about her struggles with the media attention in the 2019 ITV documentary Harry and Meghan, An African Journey. In what is now a famous clip that royal experts point to when describing the incidents that led to Megxit, Meghan talks to ITV journalist Tom Bradby. She said, "When I first met my now husband, my friends were really happy because I was so happy. But my British friends said to me, 'I'm sure he's great, but you shouldn't do it because the British tabloids will destroy your life.'" When asked if she was okay, Meghan said, "Thank you for asking, because not many people have asked if I'm okay. But it's a very real thing to be going through behind the scenes." She was moved close to tears as she told of her struggle at being in the media spotlight since marrying into the firm. The following year, Harry and Meghan announced their exit from the royal family, citing their wish to embark on the next chapter of their lives. And this next chapter apparently consisted of explosive TV interviews. In 2021, the Sussexes took part in an 85-minute tell-all interview with Oprah Winfrey, during which Meghan described her time with the royal family as a nightmare she barely survived. The Duchess also suggested the royals were racist, pointing a finger at one unnamed person whom she alleged had speculated about the colour of Archie's skin while she was pregnant with him. During this time, William and Harry's close relationship started to crumble. Describing his relationship with William, Harry told Oprah, "The relationship is space. Time heals all things, hopefully." A similar rift between brothers was seen decades before when Edward abdicated the throne and forced his younger, more introverted brother Bertie, who had a chronic stutter, to take his place. Bertie went on to become George VI and, in a gesture of goodwill, named his brother Edward the Duke of Windsor. But despite what this title suggests, Edward and Wallis spent very little time in England. The couple mainly lived in France and spent a brief stint in the Bahamas after Winston Churchill appointed him governor of the country, which at the time was still a British colony. Edward and Wallis were not invited to an official public ceremony with the royal family until 1967, when a plaque dedicated to Queen Mary was unveiled at Buckingham Palace. Here we can see the couple looking incredibly uncomfortable in the presence of Queen Elizabeth. Similarly, the Sussexes have barely been back to the UK since they stepped down as working royals in 2020. Here we can see them in attendance at the Queen's funeral on September the 19th, 2022. The body language on display in this picture is extraordinary. You can almost cut the tension with a knife. As Harry and Meghan look at each other apprehensively, William and Catherine stoically look on. Harry has been back to the UK alone on a few occasions, once to attend King Charles's coronation on May the 6th, 2023, and again when Charles revealed his cancer diagnosis. The father-son duo met for around 45 minutes at Clarence House, but Harry did not meet his brother William. We have since seen Harry meet his father again for what royal insiders suggest are reconciliation talks. But again, Harry and William did not meet. Sally Bedell-Smith said Prince William would feel a similar betrayal towards Prince Harry, as King George felt towards his deceptive older brother Edward after the abdication. She told the Oxford Literary Festival, "It is different. Harry was never going to be king, but I think there are similar feelings of betrayal that have resulted in William in particular being furious with his brother, with good reason. They had a difficult childhood, but there was a period of time, as was the case with Bertie and Edward, when they were very close." After both couples left the British royal family, their popularities plunged for different reasons. As already discussed, Harry and Meghan sat down for a tell-all interview with Oprah Winfrey. This did not go down well with the public, as many deemed it was in poor taste. Not only was it released a month before Prince Philip died, but it put undue pressure on the elderly Queen, who had no choice but to respond to their allegations of racism with a statement. "Recollections may vary," she wrote, emphasising that Harry and Meghan were still much-loved members of the family. 3 months after the Queen died in September 2022, Archwell Productions released a Netflix documentary called Harry and Meghan. The most viral moment in the 6-episode series was when a giggling Meghan recounted the surreal moment she first met the Queen by performing a deeply exaggerated curtsy in front of an awkward-looking Harry. The show was widely panned by viewers and critics due to its relentless woe is me tone, only scoring 5 out of 10 on IMDb. In January 2023, the Prince doubled down on his strategy of sharing intimate details about his family's lives by publishing a memoir called Spare. And all this from the couple who had been long-time campaigners for privacy. Harry and Meghan's popularity dropped to an all-time low of -44% following the book's publication. Wallis and Edward's popularity also hit rock bottom after they left the royal family, but for a very different reason. During the Second World War, the couple were known to be Nazi sympathisers. As we can see here, just months after his abdication, Edward met Adolf Hitler. According to biographer Frances Donaldson in her book Edward VIII, the former king greeted him with a full Nazi salute. A month before the war broke out, the Duke of Windsor recorded a message to the British public, although the BBC refused to air it. Reportedly, he urged Britain to do all it could to come to terms with Nazi Germany, according to A.M. Wilson, author of Hitler, a short biography. At the end of the war, the Marburg files were found, revealing a Nazi-devised plan to gain control of Britain, overthrow the monarchy, and reinstate the Duke of Windsor as king. A cable from the German ambassador in Lisbon to Berlin reads, "The Duke of Windsor is convinced that if he had remained on the throne, war would have been avoided," and he characterises himself as a firm supporter of a peaceful arrangement with Germany. The Duke definitely believes that continued severe bombing would make England ready for peace. Edward, the Duke of Windsor, died in Paris in 1972 at the age of 77. Suddenly, Wallis was left alone, bereft of the man who had worshipped her. In the ultimate act of goodwill, Queen Elizabeth II, with whom Wallis had had minimal contact in the decades since her husband's abdication, hosted her at Buckingham Palace when she arrived for his funeral in the same maroon Rolls-Royce that Meghan would ride to her wedding years later. Wallis died over a decade later in 1986. Her funeral was hosted at Windsor's St George's Chapel, and Wallis was buried alongside the Duke of Windsor at the Royal Burial Ground in Frogmore. Although her funeral was attended by senior royals including the Queen and Prince Philip, one member of the family struggled to extend more goodwill than necessary to the woman who had thrown the UK into a constitutional crisis and driven a wedge between them and Edward. It was no surprise that the Queen Mother disliked the American divorcee, so when she refused to be at her graveside for the committal, Queen Elizabeth insisted that Charles and Diana accompany her and Philip instead. Writing in his book, former royal butler Paul Burrell said, "The Queen Mother was a formidable woman and she always had the last say. She did not attend the committal and refused to stand beside that woman's grave. She did, however, attend her funeral in St George's Chapel, but insisted that Wallis's name was never spoken during the service." And that is what happened. Wallis was not mentioned once by name during her own funeral service. Alas, it seems that American women do not bring much luck to the British royal family. It is said that Edward and Wallis regretted the fate they followed. Edward had exchanged the throne service for a life of idleness, and Wallis spent the rest of her life with a man who was no more than an ordinary Duke of Windsor, and whom she could not leave easily because of the sacrifice he made for her. Royal historian Hugo Vickers noted that he had never seen anyone with such sad eyes as Edward. Harry, Vickers believes, now often betrays a similar grief. Little wonder, given that he was until recently all but estranged from his close family. You have to wonder, will Harry be in the same place as his great-grand-uncle Edward in a few years' time? Will he regret his choice to cut himself off from the royal family? If we are to believe the extraordinary BBC interview where he pleaded for reconciliation with his family, this already appears to be the case. And will Meghan finally re-evaluate her decision to shield herself from the blinding glare of media interest in the UK by moving to Hollywood, inviting Netflix cameras into a fake kitchen and posting her children, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet, on social media? Whatever the case, I hope you enjoyed our look back at the tumultuous life of Wallis Simpson and the uncanny parallels with our modern-day Duchess, Meghan Markle. Do like, comment and subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals channel to be updated on all our exclusive content. Thanks for watching. Cheerio.